Good morning, everybody. Welcome in to the Week 16 edition. Sorry, Week 17 edition of the Establish the Run First Look Show. I am your host, Gary Hartman, here with you the day after Christmas. Hope you all had an excellent holiday weekend. Hope you all had a successful one from a football standpoint, whether it's best ball, season-long leagues, gambling, teams you're rooting for to make the playoffs, whatever it may be. Hope it was a great one. I apologize for the delay on this show. I've been traveling back and forth. Also apologize if the audio quality is a little worse. I'm just on my AirPods, Mike. Let me know if there's any issues in the comments, please. But here with you to break down the Week 17 slate for the first look. Just what we do here, if you are unfamiliar, for what is the penultimate show of the regular season, is go position by position, rapid fire style with our first initial reactions at different types of plays for this slate. We try to keep it as quick as possible, kind of start transitioning our heads from one weekend to the next. So let's set the table for this weekend here. We go all the way from what was our smallest slate of not only the year, but years in 9 games this past Sunday, all the way back up to what we see at the end of the seasons in a 13-game slate this week. So there are only 6 teams not playing on this main slate. Thursday night is the Jets and Browns. Saturday night is the highest over-under on the week in Dallas and Detroit. So that's a big one that is off. And then Sunday night is Packers, Vikings. Everything else is on this slate. So compared to last week where Rachaad White was our most expensive running back, we'll have all different types of plays at every single position available to us here. To kind of set the table as far as some of our higher over-under games, we do have one that is cracking above 50 this week, I believe. Let me just confirm that is the case. Maybe not. Maybe not. That was from last week. Yeah, I think only 51 is going to be on Thursday night between the Cowboys and Lions. Unfortunately, that made my list by accident there. So yeah, nothing about 50, but a handful of strong environments in the high 40s, starting with the 49ers Commanders. That is a 48.5 over under. And the 49ers, just to kind of give a little preview to team totals, the 49ers have a 31-point team total. We always talk about not ignoring when we see a team total that high. Certainly the 49ers are in that boat this week. So that is something to consider there. Then it is the Eagles Cardinals. That's a 48. The Ravens Dolphins is a 47. Colts Raiders 44.5. Chiefs Bengals 44.5. And then a bunch in the low 40s, high 30s. I think Chiefs Bengals might be up to 45.5 even. So that's one that is somewhat interesting. Titans Texans is around at 42.5 as well. So, a bunch of, on a 13-game slate, you're going to get all different types of games. From a team total perspective, I mentioned the 49ers as, big, I think right now almost 2 touchdown favorites against the Commanders as 31-point team total. And that is them coming off, a really disappointing loss as well. So it will be an interesting spot. We'll talk about them in a little bit. The Eagles also have a really friendly home matchup where they're 10.5-point favorites, and they have a near 30-point team total. They have a 29.25. Then it jumps down to the Bills, 26, Chiefs, 25.75, Ravens, 25.25, Rams against the Giants, 24.25. And then you got the Colts against the Raiders, 23.75, and then a bunch in the low 20s. So that kind of sets the table for us on this big slate. We take a sip of water, and we're going to dive right in to this monster slate. Starting with quarterback, I mentioned Jalen Hurts and the Eagles, took care of business against the Giants yesterday. But even in a game against the Giants, they still gave up 25 points the other way. One of those was a pick six, so call that what you will. But they managed to get in these back and forth games more often than not this year, or at least let teams hang around because their defense isn't nearly as good as it was last year. So you get a game at home against a Cardinals team that we all just knew that Justin Fields was the best quarterback on the week last week. And if you're spending up at quarterback this week, it's really hard to think that it's not Jalen Hurts. But Josh Allen, however, does have a 26-point team total and are 12-point favorites at home against New England. So we always talk about it. If he's going to cover that kind of spread, a likely may come on the back of a huge performance, right? So Josh Allen to me, always totally matchup proof. I would prefer Hurts this week for only $100 more in that particular spot. But both teams are going to continue to try to win for playoff seeding purposes, etc. Huge game between the Dolphins and the Ravens here in what might determine the number one seed in the AFC. Baltimore, incredible win last night in San Francisco. They are just cruising. And I think they want to, obviously lock up that number one seed. Lamar, I think it's like the MVP favorite now. Weird MVP year. But still, from a DFS perspective, we know he could pop off at any point. Has had 3 30-point DraftKings games this season, 22.58 last week. If this game does go back and forth, which, Vegas is kind of hedging. They're calling it a 47, which, you could see it either way. I could also see both teams trying to establish it and playing their style of football more. But all is to say, I think Lamar has a higher ceiling than Tua in this matchup with how strong Baltimore's defense is. So this is one of those spots where sometimes if I really like a game, I really will just kind of pick a side at the quarterback position and do all my exposure to one of those sides. So, it's only $300 more. I really would prefer Lamar, especially at home, way more than Tua this week. Man, the Chiefs, like one of the most disappointing teams that I can remember at this point, losing yesterday to the Raiders. Mahomes has very little help. Didn't really help himself yesterday either. 27 of 44. Did throw the interception there, didn't lose the ball, fumbled the ball, and didn't even crack 20 DraftKings points. This is a guy, our last year's MVP, has only cracked 30 DraftKings points once all year. I do think this is a very intriguing bounce back spot, and it's not often we get Mahomes in the mid 7Ks. So I think for tournaments in a very large slate, curious if he falls to the cracks. So keep an eye on ownership there. Probably more interested in Mahomes than I have been in a while. Fields, got it done last week. Didn't absolutely explode for the 30-plus point game that maybe we were thinking, but could have had a much bigger game on DraftKings because he was 3 yards away from the rushing bonus. Still was probably the cash quarterback he wanted at 25.5 points. They get a home matchup with the Falcons here that isn't as friendly as their home matchup with the Cardinals, but the way Fields plays in those low 7K range, you're going to still be interested. I believe Stroud will be back here, so if you wanted to make your large field tournament pool against the Titans, he can. And then Purdy, weird whatever happened last night. They said he lost because of a neck stinger, but it certainly seemed like kind of he may have gotten benched there if he could have came back in down the stretch for Sam Darnold. Certainly was his worst game of the year. If there was ever a bounce back spot, it is going to be against Washington. Now his price is up to account for the matchup because the pricing likely was locked in before last night's game. So you do have to pay 7K for Brock Purdy, but I think that he's going to be a pretty good play, but you're paying full price. Let's wait and see what happened with Trevor Lawrence. He unfortunately is really been battling the injury bug in the second half of the year, but it's not the best matchup actually with Carolina either way. Stafford gets a pretty good matchup though against the Giants. Now this is in New Jersey. We'll see what weather looks like on New Year's Eve. But Stafford, if you really want to attack the Puka and Cup stuff, because it's a good matchup for those guys, I don't mind it. There's so many options for you though that I feel like he's still more of a floor play than a ceiling play. So probably more out than in on Stafford. Really like Tyler on the other side of that Hurts game, and I'd imagine he's going to be a quite popular option this week. They're letting him throw another 38 attempts last week, still, doing some work on the ground. And, again, this is a spot that you can absolutely throw on the Eagles. So if you want to save $2,000 from Jalen Hurts, but still get exposure to this game environment, and game script should certainly be working in the Cardinals' favor from playing from behind in a 48-point total. Kyler is too cheap at 630, so I totally get that. Baker, was still solid last week, had 282, certainly didn't repeat his 380 for 4 that made him optimal in week 15. 6-1, at home against New Orleans is all just okay. Probably not on this slate, probably not someone that I'm going to be attacking heavily. Russell Wilson also, good matchup at home against the Chargers, but I just don't love the ceiling case on Russ right now. From there, Geno's underpriced again at 59, not the best matchup. But, only 2 weeks separated or 2 games separated from a 30-plus point performance there. Jake Browning going into KC, I'm not going to get into this week. I don't think that is something that is a great play. Minshew at home against Vegas, also similarly tough. Not as tough as obviously playing Kansas City, but just ceiling, I don't know if it's there. And, the Raiders certainly under Antonio Pierce have been a much tougher team. I think the range that if you really want to take punts on, you can. I mean, it's hard for me to recommend Derek Carr, because I think he's terrible. But had 29 points in Los Angeles last week. It's a pass funnel Bucks defense. He's probably making my tournament pool for what is only one of the first or second times this week. And then the other guy that we got to bring up here, assuming that he's going to get the start, is Tyrod Taylor, who came in benefit in relief of Tommy DeVito. I'm a Giants fan. I've been saying if the Giants were actually trying to win all along, it should have been Tyrod Taylor. The Tommy DeVito story was cute, but Tyrod's an actual good backup quarterback, and he's at home, and he's only 4,600 against the Rams. So if you get the starting nod there, he's probably the cheap quarterback that is most interesting to me. But again, when you get 13 games on a slate, you're going to have options galore. Let's talk about running backs. Christian McCaffrey is going to smash. Just only 14 carries last night, and so at 28 DraftKings points. Could have been a much bigger one at the very end of the game. They're on the 1 or 2, and they hand the ball to McCaffrey once and throw the ball 3 times, which didn't make much sense to me. If CMC had gotten in there, I would have advanced to a best ball finals. But what are you going to do? That is life. But 9-6, so at this point, they're only incrementally pricing him up. In my opinion, he's the MVP of the league with the way the season has gone. And you get a matchup here in Week 17 coming off a loss with the Commanders. I mean, I want to figure out how to get Christian McCaffrey in as many lineups as possible now. That number, it's not super easy, but something to consider. Kyron Williams, 8-3 home road matchup with the Giants. The role is just so massive. His 22 overall touches in Week 16 was his lowest in a 4-week period. That tells you everything you need to know. Usually he's been around, I mean, he had over 30 touches in Week 15. He had 28 in Week 14. So it's really crazy. 25 or so in Week 13. So just nuts. The role still like Kyron Williams quite a bit. Rashad White, a little bit of a tougher matchup against New Orleans. And again, I think he's a really good floor play. I question the ceiling when he's getting into this range. So maybe not my favorite overall play. Kamara, similar boat at this point, going into Tampa Bay. You can pass on them. So if you want to kind of pair him with some Derek Carr stuff, I guess that's a little bit more interesting. Jonathan Taylor came back last week, and they gave him the full workload. So 18 carries, did find the end zone, was not efficient in that matchup with Atlanta, but I wouldn't mind going back there at 7-3, assuming Zach Moss is out again. ETN would, if there's a bounce back spot in the bag for ETN, you got to imagine it's this spot against Carolina. Aaron Jones led the last Sunday in rushing against this Panthers team. You could definitely run on them. Now, I'm a little concerned about the overall look of the Jaguars offense if it isn't Trevor Lawrence, but you can run him. His price is up a little bit to account for the matchup, though, here as well. James Cook, I know, burned a lot of people in their best ball. Finals had a really rough game, and now you got a spot with New England. Probably not interested there. Mostert, I'm only attacking Mostert and H&N this week in correlation. CMC was able to succeed in this matchup, but it's not an easy matchup in Baltimore. So probably want them when I'm either in a secondary stack or when I'm attacking that game heavily. Derrick Henry should continue right along in a game against Houston that he's dominated before. When we played them 2 weeks ago, he really, really struggled. So I do think Houston's run defense a little bit stingier than the past. So something to consider there, but certainly sub 7K Derrick Henry you can consider. The same thing with sub 7K Saquon Barkley. So tons of options for you in the top end of quarterback. Pacheco came back yesterday and had 15 total touches. I guess he was concussed last night, so keep an eye there. You might get some CEH action once again. Austin Eckler is all the way down 6,700 against the Broncos. This is the team that he had 21 points on 3 weeks ago. The Chargers looked way more proficient since firing Brandon Staley last week in that Thursday night matchup. So long rest for Austin Eckler, the cheapest you'll ever get him on. I know I keep saying it, like how can I possibly keep taking shots here on Eckler, but somehow I feel like I might have to. Bijan also, same thing, way too cheap. Could have had a much bigger game, it felt like last week. He had a 7 for 50 through the air, which got him up to 19 points, just missed having a touchdown, though, and now you got a matchup with Chicago. You got to let Bijan still in the mid-6K range. DeAndre Swift gets to the nut matchup with the Cardinals, still had 20 touches last night. He's a very good play, or yesterday afternoon. Joe Mixon, I don't love him against Kansas City, and the role is not even as strong as it was earlier in the year, so no thank you there. If Jacobs goes, because he missed yesterday, you're going to get a 6-2 Josh Jacobs against the Colts in what should be bell cow work. We know Antonio Pierce wants to use him. So that is super, super interesting to me. So keep an eye there. I think that would be a very interesting GPP play. Kenneth Walker also didn't get it done for us. I know we liked him on Establish the Million last week. Still like him as a play. So-so matchup at home against Pittsburgh would make my tournament pool. Zeke worked his way back up to 6K, assuming that it's no Ramondre Stevenson. He could make your player pool, but I don't know. In Buffalo, I'm not loving any of those New England players here. Coming off that, what are they coming off the win? Yeah, coming off the win against Denver. From there, I mean, you could probably get a lot of these guys in your pool. Chuba Hubbard, Devin Singletary, just based off work alone. Javonte Williams is only 5'6" in a pretty good matchup. Then you got the Pittsburgh guys who also have a good matchup in Jalen Warren and Najee Harris. We already mentioned CEH might play. Let's see if Brian Robinson's back. That's still a tough matchup. I'd rather attack pass game stuff there. Zamir White had a big game yesterday, 145 rushing yards. So if Josh Jacobs can't go again, he'd be on your radar. So, again, huge slate. You're going to have all different types of plays. You want Christian McCaffrey, my favorite of all the spends, and then I'm probably looking at the sub 7K range personally this week would be maybe the way I am approaching it. Okay, Tyreek Hill came back, didn't look as explosive as he has earlier in the year, but based off the injury, but still with the ankle, but still at 14 targets and was a yard away from the bonus. Like, the guy is an absolute machine. Now, I don't know if he's getting his 2,000 yards at this point after missing week 15 and not cracking 100 this past week, but Tyreek's probably going to fall through the cracks again here in Baltimore. So keep that in mind. A.J. Brown, certainly been a little bit of rough sledding from a ceiling perspective, really dating back all the way to week 8. Now he's still very firmly involved. If you look at his season-long numbers, incredible season, 101 catches, 1,400 yards, 7 touchdowns. So he's kind of just been steady Eddie, right? 13 targets, 10 targets, 11 targets, and he's really going to turn those into just mid-teens points. So that's a little bit concerning, but this is a really good bounce back spot. And I feel like he'll get some attention because people are going to want to attack this game. But again, there's so many options here for you. I don't know how much attention he'll get. Somebody that won't get any attention is Stephon Diggs. And I don't know really how you go to this point. He's not cheap enough for what we've seen in the second half of the year. New England matchup for him. He had 17.8 points in this matchup first time. It's not an easy matchup. And he's just not super, super involved right now. For whatever reason. So it's been a weird second half of the year for Stephon Diggs. Hard to go there. Would make my MME player pool, and that is it. I mentioned the Rams guys. It's a good matchup for both of them. We saw A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, Dallas Goedert all have various levels of success against the Giants yesterday afternoon. I have no issues with going to any of these guys. Puka obviously had the huge game here in Week 16 with his 9 for 164 and a touchdown. Cooper Kupp still had 12 targets. So, like, both these guys, I'm not playing them together, but they're both really strong plays. Mike Evans was an awesome play this past week. Gets a New Orleans team that obviously the Marshawn Lattimore matchup specifically has been one that has given him fits in the past. Only had 3 for 40 last week. So maybe this isn't the week we love Mike Evans after what has been an excellent, excellent season with Baker Mayfield, but something to consider. And then Keenan Allen, I can't imagine he wants to come back at this point this year, but if he does, I'm probably still not going there on a 13-game slate if he should stick. Same thing with Jalen Waddle, depending on his health. Debo, though. Debo was my cover boy for this video. I realized that we had not clicked on Debo as our cover boy yet, or landed on Debo as our cover boy. We had Purdy, we had Christian McCaffrey, maybe we had Kittle or Ayuk, I don't remember. But, I feel like this Niners team had to be encapsulated when we wanted to talk at a first look of Week 17 due to the 31-point team total, the matchup with Washington. And Debo has been a league winner for a lot of people, right? Prior to last night, 22.4, 38.8, 37, and 22 DraftKings points. And even last night, he only got 9.4, but so he led his team in, or he had the highest target total of probably the season, right? At 12 targets, or tied his Week 3 number there. So it's really hard to not like Debo quite a bit. But I say that about Debo. I say that about Ayuk at 7K, and I'll say that about Kittle against tight ends like him, McCaffrey, all these guys. I want to mix and match and get all my exposure to as many of the Niners as I can. We'll see if Jamar Chase is available with the shoulder, but it's a tough matchup in Kansas City. Same thing with Pittman. We thought he was going to go, and then didn't end up going this past week with the concussion. If he's cleared, I don't mind him in this spot. So-so matchup with the Raiders, but he's such a high floor player. And somehow we're all the way down to the point where Devontae Adams is below the likes of Michael Pittman from a price perspective. We're only 2 weeks separated from him. I mean, that 63-point game was a complete out, but he had 27 points. This matchup with the Colts, I feel solid about. I don't mind going to Devontae Adams at that type of price. Devonta Smith, 4 for 79 and a touchdown last night. Been a much better second half of the year. Certainly, if you need the money from A.J. Brown, probably prefer A.J. Brown this week. but something to consider. Nico, I would imagine, should be healthier this week. Did have 6 targets and found the end zone to kind of salvage his day, but I don't think he was fully right in week 16 in that matchup with the Browns. Now you get a home matchup with another week to get healthier against Tennessee. Last time in this matchup, these teams not played each other yet? Or maybe he just missed the game. But anyway, Nico been awesome so far. Still no take Dale. Great matchup there for Nico Collins. DK Metcalf, found the end zone again. He's had that one massive, huge 40-point game, and then he's been capped out right around 20 points. That scares me from a ceiling perspective, and the matchup with Pittsburgh is just whatever. So I think if I'm spending in this range, I'd almost rather be at all these guys around him. And Metcalf's been a guy that I've liked quite a bit. This year, Rashee Rice, they bring all the way up to 6'9", had another 12 targets yesterday. I don't have many holes to poke in that play. And Chris Olave, I think, is way underpriced here at 6'8". And I already talked about liking this matchup for the Saints passing offense. So a lot of options for you in the top tier. And then you get into this mid-tier with a lot of interesting names, but they all have kind of toughish matchups. Calvin Ridley against Carolina, DJ Moore against Atlanta, T. Higgins against the Chiefs. So that's kind of interesting. And then Sutton also questionable, left last night's game after going into concussion protocol, so short week and concussed. I wouldn't expect he's going to go. Godwin already talked about maybe prefer him over Evans after he's kind of been a bigger part of the offense the last 3 weeks, and he's cheap. But this tier is not necessarily the tier I want to play in. It's like the 6Ks, the high 6Ks and into the 7s. But this is all of question marks on this tier. Hopkins against Houston, I guess, is okay. I prefer DeAndre Hopkins with Will Levis though. Thielen as well is now back all the way under 6K. He had his best week, though, in a very long time and was 6 yards away from the bonus. And the matchup here with Jacksonville is pretty good. So if Bryce Young is going to show the ability to move the ball like he did in week 16, I think Thielen at the sub 6K is an interesting play. Lockett's all the way down to 5'7". Zay Flowers had a big game last night. He is 5'6". So if you're trying to get exposure to that big game, but the Ravens-Dolphins game, he's a way to do it. Now, Gabe Davis, we just had a boom game for, and he's literally 0, 25.5, 0, 0, 26. It's the definition of boom bust. I have a hard time thinking we're getting lightning is striking twice here. Last time against New England, he had 1 for 6. Maybe though. I mean, I make my MME player pool because of what that ceiling does ultimately entail, but it's tough. And then Pickens is the other guy that if Mason Rudolph starts again, I think you have to consider with how they connected downfield there for sure. No Amari Cooper on this slate, who absolutely broke this past week's slate. He'll be on Thursday night. And everything under 5K we'll talk about in our cheap wide receiver volume article that will come out on Thursday afternoon. Okay. Tight end, we got, I think if there's a week for Travis Kelce to bounce back, I feel like it's this one. The Bengals have really struggled against tight ends, but there's just no doubt to me that it looks like Travis Kelce has lost a step. Now, when it's all said and done, he's still going to end up having well over 100 catches, probably over 1,000 yards, maybe 6 or 7 touchdowns. Like that's going to look like another very strong Travis Kelce year. But when you go in, week out, and watch these games, I think there's no doubt. And the touchdowns are down, obviously. I think there's no doubt that he's lost a step, but the price is back down now to 7K. Like that's way more approachable, in my opinion. You should compare him to the other 7K guys. And I already talked about not liking below Olave that much this week. So if you want to get to Kelce, I get it. And then you jump all the way down to Trey McBride as your next expensive tight end. And it's a good matchup for him against the Eagles, who could have given up big games to Darren Waller and Daniel Bellinger. If you look at combined tight end points for the Giants yesterday, they had success getting targets to those tight ends. Not necessarily the production, but targets, successful targets, targets that could have been bigger gains. So McBride, bounce back spot. Absolutely. I can see a ton of Hurts, A.J. Brown, Trey McBride, bring back stacks or something like that. So probably be popular again, but something to consider. Ingram's role just continues to be massive here. 15 targets, was 5 yards away from the bonus as well. Really huge role for Evan Ingram. So no issues there, especially if Trevor Lawrence can go. Not expecting him to be able to go, but even if he doesn't, then maybe he's more of a security blanket for C.J. Beathard. Not the best matchup, but better than the receivers. Kittle, also, I like the receivers better in this matchup. He had a big game last night, 7 for 126 on 10 targets for George. Kittle, obviously totally fine because I want exposure to that game. Not getting to Kincaid. Kincaid, since Dawson Knox been back, has not been a play that I think is worthy of our consideration, especially when Dallas Goedert is $100 cheaper in what is one of the more attractive game environments of the week. Cole Kmet, if he is cleared to go, had a big first half before he went down for his 4 for 107. Him and Fields have chemistry, man. So, if he goes, you could certainly get there. And then same thing with Likely as well. It was, nothing too huge last night, but was solid. Good matchup actually for Darren Waller. I mentioned those. He only ended up with 2 for 32, but could have had a bigger game if Tyrod hit him on a pass that was it probably could have been a touchdown. It was a really tough throw for Tyrod, but I thought Waller should have came back to the ball and at least caught it, which would have been a big gain there. So he's only 4-5 for Darren Waller. Again, not the same Waller from the Raiders, but I think also been more of a product of the struggles of a Giants team and a little bit of a frustrating performance on his own than anything else. Taysom Hill is 44 against the Bucks. The problem is with him, you just never know when you're getting a goose egg. And it's a huge slate. So I don't think he can really do too much of that this week. Kyle Pitts seems to succeed more with Tyler Heineke. So only 4-1 still for Pitts. Good matchup with the Bears. I think he is going to be in consideration for sure. Going down from here, Okonkwo seems to have found something with Tannehill. And, it was Tannehill that Okonkwo had success with at the end of last year as well. So I don't think things are trending in the right direction from a usage and role standpoint. Even with Levis for the home stretch of the season, Okonkwo at 3.6 is going to very much be on our radar again as a value option. Juwan Johnson had 7 targets last week. He's starting to come into form that maybe we thought he was going to be before the season. So I think he can make your player pool. And then going down from here, it's just a bunch of punts in my very humble opinion. We'll see what happens with those Colts guys. They used Will Mallory and Kylan Granson this past week without Michael Pittman. Perhaps those guys could be on our radar again, but I don't think there's too much down here. You got Dawson Knox and Kate Otten, I guess, can make your pool if you're attacking Buck stuff, but the guy has only cracked double-digit points 3 times. He had one massive game where he found the end zone twice. This is not a terrible matchup. The Saints have definitely struggled against tight ends, but I probably want to prefer someone up here. But again, a 13-game slate, you're going to get all different types of plays, whatever you want. So anyway, hope this was a helpful first rapid fire look at the week 17 slate. Really weird to see some of these games we've been talking about since May or whenever the schedule came out. Because this is the best ball finals week. If you are in those best ball finals, unfortunately, I am iced out this year, but love best ball. And I know a lot of people that I respect and admire have plenty of action coming up this week. If not, I hope you are successful in DFS with everything we just spoke about. 13-game slates, there's always more edge to be found. So keep an eye on everything we have going on at Established Run. I might make a leverage article for what bigger slates look like this week. I'm thinking about that as my topic. So check out everything we have going on behind the paywall. If you have not, and if you are not interested in joining us for the rest of the way, we will be doing NFL content through the Super Bowl. Please consider checking us out on the Established Run NBA side of things. I think we have our holiday sale still going on. If you're an NBA fan, we crush the prop streets. We're crushing the DFS streets. Our projections remain on point. And from there, if not, please just give us a thumbs up on this video and subscribe. Really appreciate you all for tuning in. We'll be back for one more regular season first look. I do not know our schedule in the playoffs yet, but at the very least, our final regular season first look coming up for you this time next week. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Best of luck in the fantasy finals week. Take care, everybody.